Hello, thank you for coming to my talk, The Sound of Quotation Marks, Prosodic Characteristics of Subclausal Quotation in English. Subclausal quotation, which also is known as partial quotation or mixed quotation in the literature, is a phenomenon in which the utterance contains material attributed to a source other than the speaker. Despite significant discussion of subclausal quotation from a semantic perspective, little work has been done to understand the intonation of subclausal quotation in English. I'll play an example now. The word genius in this example is a subclausal quotation.
Angela thinks it's an insult when she calls me a genius, all sarcastic and whatnot.
In this talk, I will tell you more about what subclausal quotation is. Then I will identify the fundamental prosodic features that characterize subclausal quotation intonation in mainstream American English in an autosemantical metrical framework using the May-Toby transcription system. The three core features are a left edge emphatic juncture, a pitch range reset or expansion on the quoted material, and thirdly, an intonation phrase break marking the end of the quotation. Then I will draw connections between these key intonational features and the semantic function of subclausal quotation. Subclausal quotation is produced with a highly salient intonational contour and is often accompanied by other paralinguistic features such as finger quotations and eyebrow wiggling. Speakers can optionally mark the beginning with the lexical marker quote, though unquote marking the end of the quotation is rare. Quoted material is typically a small syntactic constituent, such as an NP or DP, and it's not required to explicitly specify a source. This is one of the things that distinguishes it from full clause quotation, which is generally longer and reserved for direct speech reports, with a specified source for the quoted material, such as in one. Julio said, "I passed the exam with flying colors." The intonation of full clause quotation has been described as being marked with an initial intonation phrase break and a pitch range expansion. Now for the semantic uses of subclausal quotation, there are three very common uses. The first is to mimic a speaker's use of or pronunciation of a particular word. So for example, in California, Beth carries her groceries in bags, but in Minnesota, she carries them in bags. The second is to use a predicate of personal taste, which is an adjective like tasty or fun, which the speaker would not endorse in the context. An example of this is in 3. Miriam thought the obstacle course was super easy, but I barely made it past the monkey bars. And the third is to indicate perspective shift. Perspective shift is a semantic strategy a speaker can employ when they wish to use a particular phrase that they do not want attributed to their set of beliefs within a larger utterance that they do endorse. The materials for this work come from 3 sources. The first is National Public Radio broadcast recordings, and these include both news reporting as well as interviews that have more spontaneous speech. The second is TV shows such as The Office and Barry, and the third is a production task that was a component of a paired production perception experiment that I will tell you more about in a bit. There are 61 total tokens, 24 from NPR, 7 from the television shows, and 30 from the experiment. And the average number of words in the subclausal quotation was 2.5. 41 of these tokens, or about 2/3, occurred sentence medially. The materials were identified in different ways, depending on their source. For the TV materials, the actor is producing the subclausal quotation in conjunction with using air quotes. For the NPR tokens, either the presence of orthographic quotation marks marking subclausal quotation in the transcript, although I excluded titles that were marked with quotes. And the other method was perception of subclausal quotation by the author in a semantically reasonable context for subclausal quotation. And then these tokens were confirmed to be subclausal quotation by native English-speaking colleagues. Now a bit more about the experiment. It was a production perception experiment that was designed to investigate the prosody of subclausal quotation as well as its perspective shifting properties. In the relevant condition, the talker participant was shown a sentence that contained subclausal quotation surrounding the object NP. So an example item is in 4. Larry challenged an alarming rule at the board meeting. The participant read the sentence silently, then chose how they were interpreting the sentence through a forced choice task, answering the question, who considered the rule alarming? Only Larry or everyone? And then the participant produced the sentence with the intention of communicating their interpretation or their answer to that question to their partner participant. Now the key phonological features of subclausal quotation. The first, the left edge, is marked with an emphatic juncture. Next, there is a pitch range reset on the quoted material. And third, there is an intonation phrase break marking the end of the quotation with the boundary tone sequence low minus low percent or low minus high percent. A little bit of background on the emphatic juncture. The emphatic juncture is a specialized subtype of the intonation phrase boundary that functions to highlight the material following the juncture as prominent or to mark a perspective shifting phenomenon. Acoustically, the emphatic juncture is characterized by IP level final lengthening, a plateau boundary tone such as H minus L percent or downstep high minus low percent in May-Toby, and an obligatory pause. The pause is intentionally planned by the speaker rather than a disfluency. The emphatic juncture is labeled on the breaks tier using 4E. So here's an example of the emphatic juncture in a different construction, namely the transparent free relative. A transparent free relative is a relative clause that often introduces perspective shift. You can see an example of one here in 5. This is from NPR, in what some folks call a silver tsunami. And so in this example, some folks is the source that's being specified as the perspective that's being shifted to. And then the emphatic juncture is inserted, marked here by the percent symbol in the transcription, between the determiner and the noun phrase silver tsunami, which is known as the pivot. So I will play this example for you now. Listen for the emphatic juncture, which is marked in the spectrogram with the red box between A and silver.
In what some folks call a silver tsunami.
In quotation, we get an emphatic juncture marking the left edge or the start of the subclausal quotation. 2 examples for you here. The first is from the experiment. Deadly berries is the material in quotes.
Noah gathered deadly berries in the forest.
The second marks subclausal quotation, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. This is from NPR.
The phrase is treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors.
Now, why is the emphatic juncture used to mark subclausal quotation? I think it's because the emphatic juncture employs an unexpected combination of acoustic features. First, the boundary tone sequence is a plateau, which indicates an impending continuation and lack of completion. Second, the presence of an obligatory pause forces a certain level of discontinuity within the utterance. So these acoustic features are inherently in tension with one another. However, they make perfect sense when you consider the semantic function of subclausal quotation is to mark perspective shift. First, pause insertion is one of the best tools a speaker has to differentiate perspective shifted material within an utterance that also contains content the speaker does want to endorse. Meanwhile, the preceding plateau indicates more content following the pause related to the material preceding the juncture. By combining both the plateau and the pause, the speaker is cueing that they are shifting perspective in the midst of an utterance. The second key feature of subclausal quotation intonation is the pitch range reset. In every utterance that did not use the lexical marker quote, the speaker reset their pitch range at the beginning of the quotation. And this reset can often be characterized as a pitch range expansion. In this example here, which is from the television show The Office, you can hear the pitch range reset when we get to bummed out, which is the material in subclausal quotes.
Depression? Isn't that just a fancy word for feeling bummed out?
Why the pitch range reset? Well, resetting the pitch range increases the prominence of the content of the quotation, and it's also another indicator, in addition to the preceding emphatic juncture, that the material within the quotation has a source other than the speaker. Now, the pitch range following the quotation is quite interesting. Following the subclausal quotation, the speaker often returns to their pre-quotation pitch register. And often the subclausal quotation itself can be spliced out to leave a relatively continuous sounding pitch track. And when it's low pass filtered, the spliced version sounds like a felicitous English contour. I'll show you an example here. So this is a token from the experiment. The subclausal quoted material that I'll be splicing is disastrous design. Play the original for you now.
The engineer evaluated a disastrous design last month.
Now, how does it sound if we splice out disastrous design?
The engineer evaluated a last month.
Okay, and if we low pass filter it, it starts to sound like a pretty felicitous English contour. The third and final feature of the intonation of subclausal quotation is the right edge being marked with an IP boundary. This is identifiable in the sentence medial instances of subclausal quotation, which eliminates the confound with sentence final boundary tones. The boundary tone sequence used to mark the right edge is typically a low minus low percent fall or a low minus high percent rise. Of the 41 sentence medial tokens, 39 included a right edge IP break. This example here is from NPR.
3 handgun owners who had such premises permits challenged the law.
So why the right edge IP boundary? Together, the emphatic juncture at the beginning of the quotation and this IP break at the end form a prosodic bracketing. These junctures help the speaker to communicate to the listener the content they wish to attribute to another source or otherwise demarcate as pragmatically unexpected or out of the ordinary. The IP break at the end of the subclausal quotation indicates a return to the default speaker-oriented perspective. So in conclusion, we've identified 3 fundamental prosodic features that characterize subclausal quotation intonation. First, a left edge emphatic juncture. Second, a pitch range reset or expansion on the quoted material. And third, an intonation phrase break marking the end of the quotation. Each of these features serves to mark the quoted material as perspective shifted, suggesting a direct realization of the semantic function of subclausal quotation in its intonational realization. Some future directions for this work. This work has focused primarily on the production of subclausal quotation. It could prove insightful to explore the perception of these prosodic markers as well. So first, how many of these prosodic cues are necessary for a listener to perceive subclausal quotation? And relatedly, are these cues gradient or categorical? Also curious to know if prosody alone is sufficient to convey the presence of subclausal quotation, or must subclausal quotation prosody also be accompanied by those multimodal features such as air quotes and facial expression? And lastly, some of this data could use a bit more confirmation. So for the NPR tokens in particular, I want to conduct an experiment in which linguistically naive native English speakers provide an orthographic transcription of each token. And if the participants' transcriptions consistently include orthographic quotes, the intonation identified by the author in these tokens is indeed the prosody canonically associated with subclausal quotation by native speakers. This would also provide us a bridge to link up that semantic literature on subclausal quotation, which normally focuses on orthographic quotation marks, with the prosody and intonation that go along with the way people use these in oral speech. Thank you.